to ASMR Reality. I got a great comment last night about asking me to say something during my intro where it shows the green screen and says ASMR Reality. I never really thought about this, but the comment was that, when they start the video, they think that their volume is down, so they turn their volume up, and then all of a sudden when I start whispering, it's like, oh my god, it's like super loud. So from here forward, I'm gonna say welcome to ASMR Reality during that intro. So you see your comments, I listen and I modify. But thank you for that. It makes a lot of sense, and I don't want to bust people's eardrums. So, okay, tonight we are going to do part 2 of the Unsolved Mysteries. So we're on number 16. This is the Axman of New Orleans, starting in 1918, and over a period of 18 months, the city of New Orleans was haunted by a serial killer known as the Axman. The Axman was the personification of the boogeyman, only attacking at night, and was rumored to be responsible for 12 attacks and 6 deaths. To make this mystery even more chilling, he seemed to only creep on his victims while they slept. Oddly enough, the Axman never used his own tools and only used what he could find in the victim's house, usually an axe, which he then would leave at the scene of the crime. The majority of the Axman victims were Italian immigrants or Italian Americans, leading many citizens of New Orleans to believe that the crimes were ethnically motivated. Many media outlets drew frenzy from this aspect of the crimes, even suggesting mafia involvement despite the pure lack of evidence. Other crime analysts have suggested that the Axman killings were related to sex and that the murderer was perhaps a sadist specifically seeking female victims. Other theories include that the Axman killed male victims only when they blocked his attempts to murder women, supported by cases in which the woman of a household was murdered but not the man. A less likely theory is that the serial killer committed the murders in an attempt to promote jazz music, suggested by a letter that the murderer himself was rumored to write, which stated that he would spare the lives of those who played jazz in their homes. The Axman was never identified and the murders remained unsolved. Again, I think this is a case of, this happened in 1918, there was no technology. It just was so much easier to get away with stuff back then. Number 17, the death. I left my air filter on. I'm going to turn it off real quick. One moment. Sorry about that. Number 17, the death of the boy in the box. On February 25th, 1957, a body of an unidentified boy was found in a box in an illegal dumping ground near Philadelphia. The boy was estimated to be around 4 to 6 years old, weighed about 30 pounds, and stood around 3 foot 3 inches. He was found naked but wrapped in a blanket. His hair was recently cut and his body was recently washed clean. There were small scars on his chin, groin, and left ankle, some of which proved he went through a small medical procedure. He was found with blunt force trauma to the head that was determined to be the cause of death, and there were no witnesses. The body was found by a young man who was walking through the abandoned lot. Strangely, the man waited a whole day before contacting the police, and even a second man had previously found the boy's body but had not contacted the police because he didn't want to get involved. With the cold weather and delayed phone call, police weren't able to accurately estimate the time of the boy's death. In order to identify the boy, the body was kept in the morgue while visitors from 10 different states tried to look for identifiable marks to no avail. Police sent out 400,000 flyers of the boy to police stations, post offices, and courthouses all over the country. Even the American Medical Association sent out a description of the boy, but it led nowhere. The police compared the boy's footprints to hospital officials in the area and even took fingerprints, but no records show that the boy ever existed. In 2016, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released a forensic facial reconstruction of the victim and added him into their database. Unfortunately, the boy has never been identified, and the case still remains open. Number 18, the mysterious drowning of Natalie Wood. On November 29, 1981, around 7:30 a.m., actress Natalie Wood's body was found floating face down in the Pacific Ocean about 200 yards away from Catalina Island's Blue Cavern Point. She was wearing only a flannel nightgown, blue wool socks, and a red down jacket. Wood was one of Hollywood's biggest stars up until the time of her death, with roles that included Miracle on 34th Street and West Side Story. Eerily, Wood's mother had given the fear of dark water to her daughter because a fortune teller had prophesied that she would die of drowning. As a child, it was reported that her fear of water was so great, she was even afraid to wash her hair and had recurring nightmares about drowning. Wood had been working on the film Brainstorm at the time, along with actor Christopher Walken, and was invited to join her and her husband Robert Wagner on their yacht named the Splendor. According to the captain and family friend Dennis DeVerne, according to the captain and family friend, Wood had become infatuated with Walken during filming, and Wagner had flown to the movie set to make sure he wasn't making a fool of himself over this. The group left on the boat around 12 in the afternoon on November 27, 1981. Everyone on the boat, including the captain, had been drinking for much of the weekend. On that Friday night, Wood and Wagner had argued to the point where Davern became concerned and asked Walken to get involved. Walken refused to intervene and is quoted saying, "Never get involved in an argument between a man and his wife." Davern ended up taking Wood to shore that night using the ship's dinghy, and they slept at a hotel in Avalon. The next morning, they returned to the yacht, and Wood agreed to spend the rest of the weekend on board. That afternoon, Wood and Walken went to shore to begin drinking at Doug's Harbor Reef and Saloon. They had much to drink, and their waitress reported Wood not eating much of her dinner and stumbling out of the restaurant when they were done. Walken and Wood boarded the dinghy and went back to the yacht around 10 p.m. A witness from the Harbor Patrol said they heard Wood scream about something, but they brushed it off because she was intoxicated. Witnesses from a nearby boat claimed they heard shouts around midnight. However, there was a party going on nearby, so they thought it was from the party and didn't intervene. One of the witnesses, John Payne, said he heard a woman scream, "Help me! Someone help me!" coming from the stern of the Splendor and potentially from a dinghy. He then thought he heard a man's voice say, "Okay, honey, we'll get you." But the tone was so mocking, which is why he thought the cries were associated with the party. According to Wagner, there was a non-violent argument that broke out between him and Walken over politics. Wood wasn't involved and quickly became bored and assumedly went to bed. However, Wagner didn't realize she was missing until he went to go kiss her goodnight around 1:30 a.m. The Coast Guard was alerted, and Wood was found floating 6 hours later about a mile from the yacht, with the dinghy not too far from her. Los Angeles County Coroner Thomas Noguchi ruled the cause of death to be accidental drowning and hypothermia. According to Noguchi, Wood had been drinking and she may have slipped while trying to reboard the dinghy. Wood's sister Lana expressed doubts, alleging that Wood could not swim and had been terrified of water all her life, and that she would never have left the yacht on her own by dinghy. To this day, her death remains a mystery. Number 19, the Ketty Cabin Murders. On April 12, 1981, in Ketty, California, the sharp Sharp family and some friends went to sleep inside Cabin 28 at the Ketty Resort Lodge. Sheila Sharp would wake up to find her mother, Sue, her brother Johnny, and their family friend Dana Wingate brutally murdered inside the cabin while her 12-year-old sister Tina was missing from the scene. Sheila only escaped the murders by sleeping at a friend's cabin next door. Surprisingly, they found Sheila's two younger brothers, Greg and Rick, and their friend Justin Smart asleep in another bedroom inside Cabin 28 and safe. Tina's remains would be found by an anonymous tip on the 3rd anniversary of the murders. Her skull was found 50 miles away from Ketty in a different county. There were only 2 suspects that the police examined: Marty Smart and his roommate, Marty Smart was married to Marilyn Smart, and they were parents to Justin Smart. Marty was apparently an abusive husband, since Sheila Sharp had just escaped an abusive relationship herself. There were reports that she was giving Marilyn some counseling. When Marty found out that Sheila was interfering in his marriage, he reportedly went ballistic. Soon after the murders, Marty left Ketty for Reno. Law enforcement felt that the murders took more than one person to conduct, which is why they took Bobady into question as an accomplice. Bobady was also an ex-con. Despite there being so much more to the case, the investigation oddly stopped there. There was evidence that seemingly went unnoticed and people of interest that were not examined properly. The murder of the Ketty crime has not been identified and the case remains unsolved. That one should have been solved. The Gardner Museum heist. Number 20. On March 18th, 1990, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston fell victim to one of the greatest art thefts in history. Only 13 pieces of art were stolen, but the combined value of all those paintings was worth over $500 million. On the night of the heist, 2 inexperienced guards were on duty. One of them was named Richard Abath, who was a music school dropout and part of a rock band. By his own admission, he confessed that he would come to work drunk or stoned after a performance. Still, he insisted he was sober the night of the robbery. At 12:54 a.m., a fire alarm went off on the 3rd floor of the museum. When Abath went to go investigate, there was no fire. Whether this was part of the thieves' scheme is unknown. At 1:24 a.m., 2 men dressed as Boston police buzzed the security desk where Abath was stationed. The men said that they were responding to a disturbance call and demanded entry. St. Patrick's Day parties were happening around the city, so the disturbance calls made sense to Abath. The guard buzzed the men into the employee entrance, which violated museum protocol. Then, when the men reached Abath behind the desk, one of them said, "You look familiar. I think we have a default warrant out for you. Come out here and show us some identification." Abath was tricked to leave his control desk, which had the only button that would trigger a silent alarm. He was then instructed to face the wall and was handcuffed. The second guard then appeared, and he was also arrested. When the second guard asked why he was being arrested, one of the men replied, "You're not being arrested. This is a robbery. Don't give us any problems and you won't get hurt." An hour and 21 minutes later, the thieves made out with the 13 timeless works of art. They cut Rembrandt's Christ in the Storm on the Sea of Galilee and a lady and gentleman in black from their frames, removed Vermeer's The Concert and Flink's landscape with an obelisk from their frames, pulled an ancient Chinese bronze gu or breaker from a table, and took a small self-portrait etching by Rembrandt from the side of a chest. In the museum today, empty frames now stand where the paintings were hung as a remembrance. The thieves have yet to be caught, and the location of the art pieces is still unknown. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum has set a $10 million reward for information leading to the recovery of the stolen works. Wow. Number 21, the disappearance of Jimmy Hofa. Jimmy Hofa was the former Teamsters president from 1958 to 1971. The Teamsters were known primarily as a labor union for drivers. At just 18, Hofa succeeded in getting dock workers better pay by organizing a strike. He began organizing for the Teamsters a year later and gradually rose through the ranks. Hofa's influence as the Teamsters president was significant. At the time, 90% of U.S. transportation was controlled by Teamsters, who were controlled by Hofa. In 1941, Hofa and his Teamsters were in a turf battle with their rivals in Detroit. It was during this time that Hofa got involved with the mob. Hofa hired the mob to get rid of the rivals in the city. Although it worked, Hofa was essentially owned by the mafia. The mob and Hofa had a symbiotic relationship in which the mob was able to take loans out of the Teamsters pension fund. These funds funneled into many Las Vegas casinos, and in return, Hofa and the pension fund got a favorable return on these loans. Despite his connections to the mob, Hofa was still loved by the Teamsters as he was known for increasing benefits and wages for workers. Throughout the 40s and 50s, Hofa was able to have good relations with the mob until he started a 13-year prison sentence in 1967 for crimes including bribery, jury tampering, and mail fraud. He was then pardoned by President Nixon in 1971 as long as he abstained from any union involvement until 1980. This would lead to Hofa's downfall. In July 1976, it was discovered that the Teamsters' largest pension fund had been robbed of hundreds of millions of dollars, and only 2 weeks later, Hofa vanished. On July 30th, 1975, Hofa was seen at a Detroit area restaurant. According to notes, Hofa wrote to his family. He was asked to meet two acquaintances at 2 p.m. The acquaintances were suspects Anthony Giacalone and Anthony Provinciano, both members of the mob. However, they never showed up to the meeting, and when they were both questioned by the FBI, they insisted that no meeting was ever organized. Despite extensive surveillance and bugging by the FBI, investigators found that the mafia members who they thought were involved were generally unwilling to talk about Hofa's disappearance even in private. Despite the lack of evidence, there is wide agreement among crime historians and investigators close to the case that Hofa was murdered by his enemies in the mafia. However, key details of his disappearance remain either unknown or unprovable, and this has ensured that no individuals have ever been charged in relation to the case. Hofa's body has never been found. Number 22, the 8-Day Bride. On May 20th, 1947, the body of 22-year-old Christina Kettlewell was found 150 feet away from her honeymoon cottage in just 9 inches of water on the banks of a river in Severn Falls, Ontario. Just 8 days prior, on May 12th, Christina had eloped with 26-year-old war veteran John Ray Kettlewell after knowing each other for 3 years. Jack had a friend named Ronald Berry, who was a 28-year-old immigrant from Italy, who was a professional ballroom dancer. It was reported that Jack, Christina, and Ronald spent an inordinate amount of time together. Christina's family even thought that Ronald was in love with Christina. Following the elopement, the newlywed Kettlewell spent the next few days at a rented apartment in Toronto. Bizarrely, Ronald joined them for the entirety of their honeymoon, and on May 17th, the trio headed to Ronald's remote cottage in Severn Falls, which was only accessible by boat. During that time, it was reported that Christina began to act out of character. She would go into crying fits and at other times seem dazed. Evidence suggests that Christina had conversations with Ronald about whether Jack truly loved her. On May 20th, Christina disappeared and Ronald's cabin mysteriously caught on fire. Ronald returned to the cabin to find a disoriented Jack sitting in the cabin with an apparent head injury and pulled him out of the flames. It was then reported he looked for Christina but couldn't find her anywhere in the cottage. Ronald then said that the cottage burned down in just an hour. He then took Jack into the boat, back to the mainland of Seven Falls, took his friend to the hospital, and then contacted police. It was then that the situation became worse. Later, Christina's body was found by an owner of a boathouse in the area. Her body was free from burns or any signs of violence. An autopsy found traces of codeine in her stomach, but her ultimate cause of death was declared a drowning. Interestingly enough, Major Lawrence Scartfeld, who acted as a first responder to the fire, reported that he saw no signs of Christina's body in the area when he went to go get water to help extinguish the flames from the house just hours earlier. Jack, Ronald, and 20 other people were questioned by police, and despite possible theories, including that Christina committed suicide, this case remains unsolved. Strange. Yeah, something's going on there with that love trio, I'm sure. Somebody got upset with somebody. I'm gonna skip over this one. This is from 1935, and it's doesn't seem that interesting. This is another one, 1935. I'm gonna try to... Oh, goodness gracious. This one's in 1587. Good Lord. I'll skip that one. This is 1910. A lot of these are just really, really old. 1906. 2009. Here we go. The Jameson Family Disappearance. On October 8th, 2009, the Jameson family, 44-year-old Bobby Dale, 40-year-old Sherilyn Leanne, and their 6-year-old daughter, Madison Stormy Starr, were seen for the last time before vanishing without a trace. The family lived in Eufaula, Oklahoma, and was last seen by a man who lived in the mountains in southeastern Oklahoma. However, the witness claimed that he only saw the family and no one else in that area during the time. The Jamesons were there to view a 40-acre plot of land that they were looking to purchase. They were looking to live in a shipping container that they had already been living in on their plot of land in Eufaula. On October 16th, 8 days after the Jamesons were last seen alive, the first major discovery in the case occurred. Hunters in a remote location in the woods about a quarter-mile away from the last spot the Jamesons were seen discovered the Jamesons' abandoned truck, which was still locked. Inside the truck, investigators found Bobby's wallet, Sherilyn's purse, jackets, a GPS, Bobby's cell phone, $32,000 in cash, in a bank bag, and the Jamesons' pet dog, Macy. The pet dog Macy was incredibly malnourished but still alive. Oh, that's awful. Bobby's cell phone had a picture of Madison, and it is believed to have been taken the day before they disappeared. The truck showed no evidence of any struggle. Former sheriff remarked, "I think they were forced to stop and got out of the truck to meet with someone they recognized, and I think they either left willingly or by force." The GPS unit in the truck indicated that the family had been farther up a nearby hill prior to the location where the truck and belongings were found. Investigators followed the coordinates and found footprints. One day later, on October 17th, 300 people, including authorities and volunteers, staged a large-scale air and ground search party, but unfortunately, any leads went cold, and the search for the Jamesons was called off. On November 16th, hunters were scouting for deer hunting locations when they found partial skeleton remains of 3 bodies, 2 adults and 1 child. The remains were found less than 3 miles from where the Jameson family had parked their truck 4 years earlier. The search uncovered shoes, bits of clothing, adult teeth, an adult arm and leg bone, I would bet money that money was the motive. Somebody wanted that cash, and somehow they hid it, but they lost their lives over trying to keep their cash. Nothing is more important than living. Lesson of the day. Okay, number 29 is the O.J. Simpson case, but we will save that for part 3. I appreciate you watching this evening, and I will see you on the next one.